Today I'm joined by Jennelle Sherman, who leads a ministry called Christ-Centered Couple. From the beginning, marriage has been part of God's plan for humanity. It was God who made us male and female, and God who said, "A man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh." Now, two becoming one sounds romantic, but in reality, it's often a painful process God uses to reshape our perspective, our character, and our values. It's no surprise that sin and the fall have greatly damaged our understanding and practice of marriage. Jennelle's ministry helps couples center their marriage on Christ and actively choose unity instead of division. There's a lot in this conversation, and even if you're not married, there's much to learn from Jennelle in this episode. Before starting Christ-Centered Couple, Jennelle served on staff with the Well Training and Discipleship Ministry in Tampa for 8 years, discipling women, leading Bible studies, speaking at conferences, and actively mentoring others. I enjoyed this conversation and know it will be an encouragement to many of you. Jennelle, welcome on to the show. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much for having me.
You are someone who I got to know through a mutual friend, Susie Walther, and we had Susie on the show a few months back. And she actually recommended that I speak with you because of the work that God has done in your life, your experience in discipling others, and the ministry that you have, Christ-Centered Couple. So we're going to get into all of that. Many of our listeners are familiar with the Well Ministry there in Tampa, but I wanted to ask you a little about your backstory. So how did you come to faith? I know that you've been following the Lord, seeking first the kingdom really for the past 10 plus years. So what was it that led you to Christ? Maybe tell us a little bit about your background and your story.
Sure. So I'm 100% Puerto Rican. Both of my parents are from Puerto Rico, and I'm kind of like that first generation, here, and the first one to graduate from college and kind of get that stuff started. So I am been fortunate enough to, have both languages and be kind of in both cultures my whole life. We lived on military bases my entire life, and I grew up with a mom who had a really strong faith. Both my parents had a lot of strong faith, but my mother in particular, I remember her always reading the Bible and just emulating what it would look like to follow Jesus, just loving people. And so I always knew about God. I believed there was a God, but my mother didn't drive, and she, so never took us to church. So we never went to church growing up, and it wasn't until I was in youth group that I really first, I guess I would say, surrendered my life to Christ in youth group. At 15 years old, I heard a story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego from Daniel chapter 3, and I thought, I want to be like those guys. I want to have a faith like that and know that God's going to be with me no matter the fire, no matter what comes. And so I surrendered my life to Christ there in youth group shortly after my mom got diagnosed with terminal breast cancer. And she ended up passing away in my teen years. And I prayed for her to be healed. And in my little faith that, as a teenager, God did not answer that prayer. And that silence from God really affected my relationship with him. And so I turned away from God until about 26. And then at 26 years old, a woman invited me to church at a business meeting, and everything was going wrong in my life. And so I went to church. And so I began adding church in, thinking that would somehow fix the brokenness in my 20s that was going on. But it wasn't until I was in, I guess I should say, I totally hit rock bottom in 2012. And I got invited probably for the 20th time to the Well. I had said no many, many times, but in this particular occasion, I was open, obviously, and I decided to show up. And that's where I very first heard this idea of Jesus not only being Savior, but being Lord of my life. And so I had knew Jesus as a savior. I had said that prayer, like I said, when I was 15, and I believed that I was going to go to heaven when I died. That was kind of this thing. I was like, yeah, do you want to go to hell, or do you want to go to heaven when you die? Do you know where you're going to die? You know, where you're going to go? And so that was more the premise then. But now, attending the well for the first time, I was challenged with this idea of Jesus is Lord. And if he is Lord, then that means he has the right to rule in every area of my life. And I began learning disciplines like reading the Bible and praying. And that lordship became real for me. I was able to begin to surrender those things in my life and begin to actually live for Jesus for the first time.
I love hearing people's stories because obviously we're going to have a conversation here over the next 30 minutes, and hopefully we'll just get to capture some of the highlights of what God has done in your life. But there's such a rich story of God's faithfulness and God's patience and God's goodness in all of our stories. And, you know, I hear that just in what you were sharing there, some of the different themes with God's faithfulness over time to bring you to himself and to help you understand more of his character and what it actually means to have faith and to belong to him. I was reviewing one of my memory verses earlier today out of Colossians chapter 2, and many people will be familiar with these verses 6 and 7. But it says, "Therefore, just as you received Christ Jesus the Lord, so walk in him, being rooted and built up in him and established in the faith, just as you were taught, abounding in thanksgiving." And like every phrase in those verses has meaning. So, you know, many of us, I think, have a similar experience. I know I had an experience similar to yours where the gospel I was presented to in my earlier years, or the gospel that was presented to me in my earlier years, was really about avoiding hell and getting to heaven after this life is over. But it didn't really connect me to Jesus, you know, and it didn't really have much to say about what life should look like in this life as a person of faith. So, you know, God's goodness to draw us to himself and to help us discover. And that's not something that always happens overnight. So I hope folks that hear your story will keep that in mind, not just for themselves, but many of us have family members and friends that we've been praying for and reaching out to, and maybe we have reached out to them 19 times to invite them to something like the well. And we just need to keep praying and keep living a life of faith because God is at work.
He is at work, and in his timing, you know, he'll bring us to that awakening. And like to your point there, where you said that about, that's one of the most important things I've learned from being part of the well training and discipleship ministry, is that complete understanding of the gospel, to really understand it. And like, in my opinion, what the well calls, I guess, too, is just this, I had a cheap grace gospel. It was kind of this idea of no matter what I did, God's going to forgive me. And I could kind of live however I wanted until I got to heaven. And, you know, attending the conference that they have, Reclaiming the Gospel, which is basically helping us put those missing pieces back into the gospel. And that really showed me that the gospel is, you know, a story, helped me to understand what is that story and be able to, you know, explain that story to others. And then the gospel is a power. It's not just this free gift, you know, that I get and then I can put it on a shelf when I want to go drinking or go do things that maybe, you know, oh, maybe Jesus might not go to these places, so I'll just leave my free gift back here. You know, the gospel is a power. There should be transformation. There should be power there. And then the gospel is a relationship, you know, and that's through my prayer, through my time in the word. And then the gospel is a participation. You know, that was key for me, really realizing that when I surrendered my life to Christ, that was a vocational, you know, change. Like, this is my job now. It's my job title. I am a disciple who makes disciples, and I've got to participate through my prayers, you know, through my relationship with God and become aware of the work that he's doing, so that I can join it and participate in it. So, you know, getting that full picture of what is the gospel. And it's so much more than, you know, just that initial surrender. It involves an ongoing surrender kind of like into, I don't retire until I expire. Susan says a lot. And I love that, because as long as I have breath, there's something God wants to do in and through me.
Yeah, I love it. And when Jesus told the parable of the soils, or of the sower, where the farmer went out and he cast seed on these different soils, and all of those different types of ground were exposed to the message of the kingdom, the gospel that Jesus was proclaiming. And yet only one, the fourth soil, the good soil, received the seed, grew, and then produced fruit, some 30, some 60, some 100-fold. But one of the things that characterizes true faith is transformation. And so if you think about those three different soils that did not ultimately bear fruit, that's the big thing that you would see. Like if you had walked by those 4 fields at the time that the sower was casting the seed, they would all look a certain way. But if you came back 6 months later, 3 of them would look the same way, but one would look completely different. And so I think that really goes to the point of what you're sharing there about the importance of having that full view and understanding of the gospel. And I love what you were saying there about the participation, that the gospel is a call to participate, that God's brought us into his family and he wants us to be part of the family business. So yes. You are in like a bit of a transition right now where you've been part of the Well Ministry, and you still are there in Tampa, in the Tampa area. But you're also, God has been leading you to start a ministry called Christ-Centered Couple. And I'd love to hear some about how did that come about? Like you've had this history with the Well training and discipleship ministry. How has that prepared you for where you understand God is taking you now? And can you tell us a little bit more about Christ-Centered Couple and why you chose that name? So I just asked you 3 questions, so let me back up. So what have you learned over the past 8 years that has led you to this new venture of faith that you're taking?
Okay, so yeah, with the Well, I've been, like you said, I was on staff with them for 8 years with the Well Training and Discipleship Ministry, and God really allowed me to have a tremendous exposure to so many things and discover gifts and talents and abilities that I would have never known that I had through leading Bible studies and conferences, mentoring women, and just being a part of the day in and day out operations of this ministry that God was clearly and still is clearly at work in. Was just an amazing season of my life. Unfortunately, COVID came and a lot of people were impacted, by COVID in different ways. Our family was really negatively impacted by COVID financially, and my husband's job just took a big hit. And so I had to go back into the workforce after being in full-time ministry and I was homeschooling my kids and a kind of pretty stay-at-home mom. I had a very flexible, like a part-time thing that I did on my own time, payroll and invoicing. So I was able to do that on the side, but I didn't have a full-time job that demanded all of my time. And so I had to get back into the workforce. And I had a discussion with Susie, and I remember that day. It was just one of the worst days of my life, honestly, just sharing with her what I was going to have to do, what I had to do for my family at that time. And I remember her telling me, I was just like, but it's going to be fine. I can still do everything that I'm doing, and it's not going to change a thing. And I'm just going to add this job in. And I remember her looking at me and just saying, no, that's not going to happen. And she, really nicely, basically told me, no, you cannot handle all of these things. And I was so thankful because it released me, of it, because I didn't want to quit. I didn't want to stop doing the work that I've been doing. I loved what I had been doing. And but God was very clearly saying it was going to be okay, because he moved in these other women who God released them from their jobs, whose husbands, were blessing them and joining the staff. And it was just very fluid. I mean, it took time. It wasn't instant, but the Lord showed me over that year and a half that I had to enter the workforce that it's okay. It was his work, and he was going to continue the work. And I wasn't just, not involved anymore. I was just doing a different part of the kingdom work, but I was still part of the kingdom work. So it just began to look differently. I began to pray, Lord, now what? What is this supposed to look like for me? And it was a really rough season. I felt like I was in the desert. I guess that would be like a desert wilderness time for me these past probably 2 going on 3 years for me. It's been just kind of me and God, and kind of longing for what I had before. I felt like the Israelites, I wish we could be back in Egypt, or whatever. I just wanted to go back and be where God had me before, doing what I was doing before. And he was like, no, I'm doing a new thing. I'm doing a new thing. And he, years earlier in 2019, right before COVID, he had given us the really powerful verse, Isaiah 43:19. And so that just kept on. That was just kind of my theme verse during that season, reminding myself that he will make a way for the streams in the desert. And, don't I perceive it? He's doing something new. And so I just kept trusting and kept praying. And then something funny happened. My son told me I should start TikToking because I was really sad. I was just down, and not really liking my day in and day out of my life. I was working 8 to 10 hours. I was on the phones all day, talking to people with no break, except for my 1 hour lunch that I had to clock off and clock on, clock in and clock out. And I would rollerblade for 30 minutes. And I would make a 7 to 30 second TikTok, because nobody on TikTok has, more of an attention span than 15 seconds. So I'd make my 7 to 15 second video, add some words, add some music. And I started realizing, I just started talking about marriage and sharing the things that God had done in my marriage and the principles the biblical principles I had learned through the Well and through Renovated, the wife conference. And, it was really resonating with people. People were commenting. Millions of people were watching these videos and sending me private messages on just how broken their communication was in their marriage, how broken the intimacy was in their marriage, how out of order, things had gotten from God's design. And I just began praying, God, what do you want me to do with this information? I already had a heart for marriages. The Lord had powerfully restored my own marriage. So I had helped Susie and others at the Well lead marriage conferences and be a part of the marriage ministry that God was doing here in the Tampa Bay area. But I never thought it'd be something I'd do by myself, I guess. And during that season, God began to birth that in me and show me that you're going to do this by yourself. And you're going to show others how you centered your marriage on me, how you centered your life on me, how I transformed you, I transformed your husband, and then brought you both together and was able to transform that marriage. So I feel like, that was that dry season where God was saying, remember what I did in your own marriage. Remember my past faithfulness, and wait and trust me, and in that he began to birth that Christ-centered couple.
Yeah. So, I think that, again, there's so many themes there. We're not going to be able to explore them all, but I love the Isaiah 43:19, where that's the verse, if I'm remembering right. This is supposed to be a memory verse, Jennelle, so we'll see. But it says, forget the former things, do not dwell on the past. And I think that's so hard for us when the past has been something very rich and fulfilling and meaningful and full of love and relationships. When the past is a good thing, to step away from that or to step into the next chapter that God has for us is often very painful and difficult to do, like your story of wanting to try to hang on and add to what God was doing, but not move on from that place that he had you at the Well during those years is something that many of us experience. But when you're in that desert, when you're in that in-between place, it's so difficult to trust God, and yet it seems to me that God often does that. It may even be that that's just the norm, that God rarely takes us from one rich season of contribution directly into the next season of rich contribution. Oftentimes there's this pathway that lies between those two that, as you described, is kind of a desert place where we're mourning what is no longer part of our lives, and yet we haven't yet stepped into what God is taking us to, and so to pray and to trust. And so cool that, this conversation with your son was sort of the first, domino that kind of started things moving in this direction. Why did you name it Christ-Centered Couple? And, you've talked a little bit about what God did in your own marriage, but maybe share a little bit more about why this particular area of emphasis is something that you have a heart for.
For sure. So main reason why I have a heart for this is because of, I guess, my own past brokenness. I feel like God really ends up using that he brings hope and healing into our lives to bring hope and healing into others with the same, comfort we've received from him. So the main thing was I was a teenage girl. My mom got cancer. She passed away. My dad moved on very quickly. And I began looking for love in all the wrong places, to be honest. And I turned to all kinds of things I shouldn't have turned to, guys and drugs and alcohol, for many years, and tried to fill those voids. And I got married very young. So I was 22 years old when I got married, and I brought all of that into my relationship. And, we were not following Jesus, much less I didn't even know if my husband believed in God. That's how far away from God I was when I got married, because my mom had passed away when I was a teen. I'm now 22, get married. I am not a fan of God. I think he's either not real because my mother died, or he's just mean. Like he's just mean to have taken my mom and left me and my two siblings without a mom, and my dad moved on. And it was just a tough season where I really doubted my faith, even though I knew, like I said, where I came from, I had witnessed my mother's faith. I still chose to be very far from him. So I think that season of my life really gives me a heart for that age group of people. And I continue to minister to that age group. I go into the juvenile prisons here in the Tampa Bay area and mentor young girls. I, help with youth groups. I've been a part of youth ministry for many years. And I also have a huge heart for girls in the foster system that are teen girls in the foster system. And like last night, every Sunday night, I go, and there's this really cool program where about 75 girls come from different foster houses in the Tampa Bay area, and we provide a meal. They provide a meal there. There's activities for them to do, and there's a little boutique. That's my favorite part. I work in the boutique, and I help the girls find anything that they're needing, and they get to shop for free. So I've just always had a heart for that age group, and I believe it really, God's given me that vision of that. That's where it really starts, when kids start dating and they become a couple. I want that relationship to be built on Christ. When these young kids or even older people get engaged, I want that relationship, that engagement to be built on Christ. And then when they're a married couple, also their marriage needs to be built on Christ. So God's just given me this vision that it's not just when you're married. And really, if I could reach people before they get married, or when they're newlyweds, to be able to build that firm foundation, on Christ, their own relationship with God, so that they're a whole person coming in, marrying another whole person. And then they're able to do the work of God together versus looking for that person to complete you, coming into the marriage with those voids and those things that only God can fill. And really looking to that other person, because that's where I was. I was looking for my Prince Charming, on the white horse and my white picket fence and my 2.5 kids in my house, and this American dream. But I was building my own kingdom. And I ended up being the foolish wife that they talk about in Proverbs 14:1, tearing her own house down. And I just want to help people on the front end to know, how God intended it, what a godly wife looks like, versus how I was living it out. And I think that the younger, the better. And like I said, I don't want it to just be married couples. I want to reach people before they're married, dating couples, engaged couples, married couples.
One of the hardest things that we do in life is marriage. At least that's been my experience. We're all broken people. We're all sinners. And, when you take two, the Bible talks about two becoming one. And that is not an instant thing. It's not a simple thing. It's not an easy thing. When you take two broken people, even if they are centered on Christ, there's a whole journey that we have to walk. And actually the journey is part of how God is refining us and shaping us and helping us become centered on Him. A whole journey of learning how to live as one, as a husband and wife. So I agree. I think obviously in a best case scenario, marriage is a challenge. If you do have two people that are whole and wanting to follow Jesus and wanting to build their life, their marriage on that, their life together on Jesus, it's still a challenge. So, helping people try to enter it without some of those hang-ups and misconceptions and lies that we pick up from the world and from culture about where we're going to find true happiness and what success looks like in life and marriage. So it's incredible that you're ministering to these young teenagers and adults who are almost certainly going to get married. Most people are going to end up married at some point. What would you say are some of the things that you're trying to impress upon those people at that age that are still single? What are some principles and practices that you're trying to instill now to set them up for success in the future?
Yeah, I think some of the main things that I've come to see are most valuable is, one, to know yourself and work on your own self and your own discipleship. So seeking Jesus, reading the Bible, your own prayer time, and really, like I said, entering the relationship kind of in your best possible state, if you will, as centered on Christ as you can. But, and then knowing your enemy, knowing what you're up against, and choosing unity. I think a lot of people end up in these marriages and they're fighting against each other, and we have a real enemy, a real adversary. So I love that quote from The Art of War, where it says, if you know your enemy and you know yourself, you'll win 100 battles, and so it's about really knowing those two things. And then I think also, I tell my son all the time, look for someone who's not selfish. And look for somebody who you can sacrificially love. And that involves getting to know somebody, really the old age courting thing, getting to know their whole family. And I think I didn't do that. I didn't take the time to do that. I was dating and then I got married very quickly because of my situation. I didn't really have parents, kind of a thing. And my life was a little different and unique. But, I think that's very vital, because most of the time we're not in an arranged marriage. There's no gun being held to our head. So we're getting to choose, hopefully, who we're going to marry. And so being wise, with that choice, I think is really critical. And a lot of people, I did not, go down that path. So I think one of the major issues that I see in marriage, when I'm coaching couples that are already married and in difficult situations, whether through affair recovery coaching or through just some other area of intimacy or communication issues that they're having in their marriage, or even to just get recentered on the fact of commitment. Are we committed to this? Has God called you to stay married? Then let's stop listening to all the other voices, and let's commit. So I think the main thing is selfishness. I hear from people. The number one issue, I think, is selfishness. And it really boils down to a kingdom principle where it's either God rule or self rule. There's only two kingdoms. And if, I'm allowing God to rule, that's going to include my marriage. Like you said, marriage is part of my discipleship. Marriage is one of the ways in which God refines me. And really, it's been probably the most powerful, one of the powerfulest tools, because my husband will bring out the worst in me. He'll show me the parts of me that still need saving. That's what he, and I do the same for him. And he's able to help me to have more patience and goodness and kindness. All the fruit of the Spirit is through me dying to myself. So I think that that's the huge thing that, people need to realize. If you're not willing to die for yourself, you probably shouldn't, to yourself, you probably shouldn't get married, because you're going to have to do a lot of dying. It's just like following Jesus. You're going to have to do a lot of dying to yourself to follow him. And I'm, co-leading a book right now, Praying Like Monks, Living Like Fools. And the last chapter of that book is called Rebellious Fidelity. And it's this idea of this long obedience in the same direction with the Lord is hard because he says in the book, if we're honest, fidelity is boring. And if we think about that, it made me think, wow, so many correlations to marriage with that. And why there is so much adultery or pornography or miscommunication or people are workaholics or whatever, right? All the different selfish choices that people make in marriage. And it's because fidelity is boring. It's hard to be faithful forever. Jesus is. God has that rebellious fidelity. He's always faithful. He's always true to us. But there are seasons where I waver. We all waver in, our time in the Word or our prayer, our relationship with God. And we have to choose to have these rhythms, and develop these rhythms of prayer, to choose to maintain the relationship. And I believe that's a huge thing within marriage, that we have to make that choice to continuously review what's working, what's not working, what needs to go so that I can make more time for the Lord, what needs to go so I can make more time for my spouse. It's the same type of principles to me. And then the last thing, community. I think community is so powerful. It has been one of the key things that God has used to transform me. Through Jesus, of course, but the community that I've been a part of, to be able to be authentic, have authentic community, have the accountability in community, have other people, like for me with the discipleship, I'm looking for women who are further along, on this discipleship journey than I am, who I see, man, they're chasing hard after Jesus, or I really admire their marriage, the way they talk to each other. There's just some couples you're around and you just know that they really do love their spouse. And there's other couples you're around where you're like, wow, he can't stand her, or she does not like him very much, Right. So just putting yourself in those situations, I would highly recommend that to young couples. Like, find other couples that you admire, and do life with them. Ask to spend time with them. And it's the same with our discipleship. If you see that in another, person, ask to spend time with them and start to emulate. It's that, 1 Corinthians 11:1. Follow my example as I follow the example of Christ. So find somebody who's following Christ and begin to emulate that, and have those examples in your life.
Yeah, those are all great points. I had a friend who used to describe what it takes to be a learner, or what our attitude and character should be like as younger believers or younger couples who want to learn and grow in the way that we see maybe an older, healthy couple or an older, healthy believer, that we would love to be where they're at when we are their age. Yeah. And he grew up in the South, so he said that they had cats that weren't allowed in the house. And they had a screen door, and the cats would often be like just hanging on the screen door because they wanted to get into the house. And that's the closest they could get. So, have that level of eagerness, because I think so many times when we're young in the faith, or we're a young couple, we may see those older believers, and yet we don't want to impose. We don't want to, force ourselves upon them. But take the initiative and take ownership of your growth and your learning, and ask and reach out. Take the initiative. Don't wait for the older believers to reach out to you. Hopefully they will. That's actually a great thing when there's a community of saints where the older believers understand the importance of mentoring and discipling, and they're actively pursuing and reaching out to younger believers. But that may not be the situation that you find yourself in. You can still learn. Ultimately, it's on us to pursue Christ. Ultimately, it's on us to pursue growth and learning from others. So take those opportunities if the Lord has placed those great examples that you admire in your life. Something you said during your sharing there about helping younger single people. You talked about things to look for in a potential spouse, and one of them I think was had to do with someone who's not selfish. And I don't know if you specifically said it, but someone that's not going to be looking to you to be their savior, which, that was part of your story. And many of us, I think we enter marriage with that misconception that, this person is going to complete me. This person is going to be the answer to those longings and those holes that I have in my soul. They're going to fill that hole. And, there's a certain level of that I think is just normal, that all of us maybe, have hopes for our marriage that get recalibrated as we get further into our marriage. Just a quick story. I'll try not to lose the thread here, but about 7 years into our marriage, my wife and I were talking, and I can't remember what prompted the conversation, but we were basically talking about our marriage and where we found ourselves at that time. And, she made the statement that she was just disappointed. And I was so mad when she said that, because I was like, wait a second, yes, I'm not a perfect person by any stretch. I've made mistakes as a husband, but if you look around, I've tried to be a good husband, a good father, a good provider. And I don't think it was necessarily that she was saying that the relationship was boring. It was just that. And she didn't mean it as an insult, but what she was saying was that she had these ideas and ideals of what our marriage was going to look like. And in the early years of our marriage, she kept holding on to those and hoping that our marriage would get there. And she had reached a point where she had let go of those things. And I guess maybe similar to what we were talking about earlier, there was a little bit of disappointment that, hey, it didn't look the way I thought it would, the way I hoped it would. But that was essential, because that was when we could start building our actual marriage. Okay, now let's talk about what our marriage is actually going to look like, and we can make it as rich and meaningful as we want. It just may not look like what we had expected. And a lot of those expectations are unreasonable, because, people are not going to be able to provide for us what we need. And even our significant others are not going to be able to fill those holes that only God can. And I do think that in this generation especially, there's so much brokenness. People are coming from such damaged, broken homes. I see this with my boys. We've got 3 boys, and our daughter is our oldest. And man, I have to say that a lot of the girls, I'll have my spidey sense will be going off when I'll tell my boys, I don't see you ever being happy with this person, because she's looking to you to be this rescuer, and to, if she's down, she's wanting you to always encourage her or to pick her up. So I think it's great work that you're trying to do there to help boys and girls, young men and young women, learn how to find that in God and not in someone else.
For sure. That's the goal, because I did try to look for that in somebody else and many other things for many years. And no matter how much money I made, no matter how nice my house was, no matter how great we all looked on the outside, me and my husband and my kid, there was so much brokenness and so much void on the inside. And it was only something that God could fill. That was it. It was, there was nothing else. So,
Yeah.
nothing else is going to satisfy.
I love what you said about, what was it? Fidelity is boring. Is that?
Yeah, that's not my words. That's Tyler Stratton.
Yeah.
This Tyler Stratton. He said that, his chapter is rebellious fidelity. And that, if we're
Rebellious
honest,
fidelity. Yeah.
fidelity's boring. Yeah. That's chapter 10.
And I think that's the same thing that I think that's why God gives us the scriptures, and especially the wisdom books and the Old Testament stories, narratives, because you really have to be able to see life as a whole, to see a life well lived. And we often confuse excitement with life. Excitement equals life. And so if we can just find that next experience, or we can get that next exciting purchase or good possession, that's going to make us feel alive. And there is certainly there's that boost that you get in the moment, but it ends up fading very quickly. It's like a sugar rush. And, I do think that in a sense you could say fidelity is boring, but it leads to a full life. And so we have to decide, well, what do I really want? Do I want that momentary excitement? Or do I want to have a fulfilled life? So, well, I know you've done a lot of work with couples. What are some of the top factors? This could be a long list. So what are some of the things that you find yourself coming back to again and again with couples? Things that are either misconceptions or practices that are destroying the marriages that you see in our culture today?
Yeah, I definitely see, like I said, the number one thing really is that selfishness, because the world is telling you to elevate yourself and it's all about you. And God is telling you to love him and love people, and, love your neighbor as yourself, kind of put them first. And so I think it just goes back to knowing the truth. Number one, I think a lot of people don't know what's true and have gotten things just, misconstrued. And I think also the three main issues God's shown me, which is why I wrote a course that's coming out this summer, but it's commitment, communication, and connection. Those are the three kind of C's that he's given me. And so I think that's kind of the big issues that I'm seeing. There's a commitment issue, where people aren't really recognizing that, honestly, this marriage covenant is between me and God. So if God has called me to respect my husband, I don't just respect him when he's earned it or when I think I should. I respect him because God has told me to respect my husband. And it's the same thing with the husband. He doesn't just love his wife when he's feeling respected. When things are going well in the relationship, she respects me. She makes me feel like I'm the man. I'm awesome. So yeah, I'm going to love her and fill her love tank. No, we love because Christ loved us, and we love because it's obedience to God. So I think it goes back to that commitment and really reminding ourselves that first and foremost, our allegiance is to God. And I've got to give an account to him. And also that God has entrusted me with this spouse, and he expects a return on his investment. I'm going to give this guy back better to the Lord than I've received him. So I'm trying to constantly view, how can I help my husband make him, I like to say, how can I make him awesome sauce? How can I make Nathan the best that he can be? How can I help him to follow the Lord as hard as he can follow him? How can I help him to excel in the work that God's given him to do? And how can I help him to love me better? And so just going back to that commitment, and then looking at the communication. I think communication is huge, especially in this day of technology. Everybody is on their phone. And so many people that I coach, one of their number one things is that their spouse is on their phone. Their spouse is distracted, whether it's legit, like my husband. He gets off of work and he still has clients in Hawaii and other states that are on a different time zone than us in Florida. So he legitimately has to be on his phone after he gets home from work to handle things, because he is the breadwinner right now. I'm pursuing this ministry. I'm doing other things, thank God, and his income matters. So I don't want to get on him about being on his phone. But the reality is if he chooses to do that day in and day out, we're not going to have good communication. And so, it goes back to looking at our boundaries, talking about what are our boundaries with our phones, with our all kinds of areas, in our lives. We can get into a long conversation on that, but really having the communication that's necessary. A lot of people aren't even talking, and the communication that they're having is very bad communication. It's usually negative communication, critical communication, or very short and about things that have to get done. Kind of more like technical information. And then lastly, that connection. A lot of people have, not developed that connection, and just taking a look at the, all the different levels of intimacy. Obviously, sex is one of them. There are a lot of people in sexless marriages, but also looking at other areas of intimacy, emotional intimacy, spiritual intimacy, and, cultivating that intimacy within their marriage. Are they praying together? Are they reading God's word together? Are they in community of like-minded people spurring them on? What company are they keeping? Just all of those things really affect your, those three different areas of your marriage. How your viewpoint of communication, your connection, and your commitment level. So just kind of looking at those three main areas are what I feel God has shown me. I can kind of lump everything kind of into those three main categories roughly.
Yeah, I love that. The commitment, the communication, and the connection. And I know that you do have more resources that folks can check out at your website. I'll definitely make sure to put all of that in the show notes to this episode if folks are interested in connecting more with you, either to get coaching or to go through some of the courses and online resources that you have. Yes. Then that'll be available in the links here. So I'm going to throw you a little bit of a curveball. So I do think that intimacy is such a challenge. And some of the people that I know who are struggling in marriage, in many cases, it's because only one partner seems committed to working on the marriage. So maybe someone listening to this is thinking to themselves, well, okay, I'm on board. I am committed. I want to be better connected to my spouse. I want better communication, but right now it feels, at least to me, that I'm the only one. It's a one-sided thing. So what words would you have to share with someone who's in that kind of a scenario?
I would encourage that person to remember who God is, and remember who we are in Christ, and remember who we are to each other, and that has made all the difference for me, because I was in that situation. I was divorce-minded. I wanted to leave my relationship, my marriage, and I ended up, coming to the well after 20 invitations, and realized that I was constantly waiting for him to do something different, hoping for him to do something. And going to that first conference, Renovated, gave me like that empowerment of realizing that if I surrendered myself to God, and I allowed him to do the work in me, and I began praying, for my spouse and trusting God with the results. And I started doing that in 2012. We did not have a wedding ring. We were done. I just started attending the well. I went to that conference in the fall, and that opened my eyes to my role as a helpmate, what it looked like for me to be my husband's helpmate, what it looked like for me to submit, how submission was my power in my marriage, and how sex protected my marriage. So it went over your purpose as a helpmate, your power, which is submission, and your protection, which was sex. Those are the three main topics covered. And I began to apply those things that I learned without my husband. He didn't attend the conference. He didn't, feel called to start changing himself, even though I shared all the information with him thinking, oh yeah, he should hear this, right? But nothing was changing for him. But I kept on doing my part. I kept on. I wasn't saying if he did this, I wasn't doing it for a little while to see if he would start doing something and then quit because he wasn't joining. I just continued trusting God, just doing my part for almost a decade now. And every time I've attended the conference, every 2 years or so, and go over the material, and I come back, and me and my husband would have conversations about it, and I would share with him what I was going to begin implementing and things I felt God calling me to change. And I began changing those things, and I continued to pray for my husband, and I continued to surround us with couples that I thought were healthy, like I said, that were in a good place, that I admired, that I wanted us to be like. And he began, I believe, picking up some of those things from those men. He began talking to some of those guys. He began going to coffee and having meetings with those guys and seeing them on his own time. And God began to do that work. I can't change my husband. God can only do that. But I can change myself, and I can choose my responses, regardless of my husband's words, regardless of his actions. I still was able to choose my responses. And I did that for probably a good 6 years before I began to see some fruit in my husband. And to be frank and honest, like when I first started attending that conference, one of the things we had to fill out on that survey was, do you want sex more than your husband, or your husband wants sex more than you? And it was like, I wanted it more than my husband. And I was a rare unicorn at that time at that conference, because most women were saying, oh, I have headache, or I'm just not in the mood, or I've had the worst day with the kids. Just not today, maybe tomorrow. And just all these, most of the women at the conference were not wanting to have sex, if anything. And I was the opposite. So coming into that, I just thought, this is hopeless. These people can't even relate to me, Right. So it was a hard journey for me and of prayer and all of that. But honestly, 6 years later, my husband began pursuing me. He began initiating intimacy completely changed because he saw God's design. He began to listen to me. Like I said, it took 6 years of me explaining how sex protects our marriage for him to understand how sex protects the marriage and how important it was to God and how it was his design. And he began to make changes in that area. It was the same thing with our communication. I had to learn what his temperament was. He had to learn about my temperament, and it took years of us learning about each other's temperaments and how he's very task oriented. He is very task oriented, and he is not people oriented at all. So I honestly, he didn't even see me. He didn't even see people. He has very few relationships in general. It's just how he's wired, how God wired him. And he's a very productive person, a very efficient person, a very detail oriented person. And he does so many amazing things with those gifts and talents and abilities. But one of his gifts and talents is not forming relationships and all of that. So I've been able to learn that about him. So therefore I'm not offended. It's not that he doesn't want to have a relationship with me. It's not that he doesn't, you know what I mean? It's how he's wired. And same thing with him. He was able to learn, I'm not detail oriented. I like to have fun. I'm more spontaneous. And so, I had to tighten up a little bit. He had to loosen up a little bit, and we started to figure out our communication, and we started to figure out our love languages, and we were doing it all wrong. I was trying to love him by doing things, all these acts of service and all these positive words, because I'm a affirmer. I'm like, oh, you look great today. I love your outfit. And, oh, you're doing such a great job. And then I'll bring you a meal and I'll, do things. I'm just acts of service and words of affirmation. And he wasn't feeling anything. His love language, come to find out, was quality time. And that was the last thing I was doing. I was spending no time with him because I was so busy and so affirming. I thought I was filling him up, but he wasn't. And it was the same for me. And so now I was able to, through learning all that and through communicating, just sit with him. Just sit. And if he's watching a TV show and he's so happy.
Man, I know. See, it took me so long to realize. With Cindy, same thing. Watching TV, I was like, this is not quality time. We're not even interacting. But for her, it was quality time just to be together in a chill environment. So that's been one that we've had to learn as well. What were the 3 Ps? I know you mentioned those that is a focus for the Renovate conference.
Yeah. Purpose, power, and protection.
Yeah. And the Renovate conference is still something that happens every 2 years. Is that right?
Yes, it's actually happening this year, September the 16th, and it's simulcast. So anybody can participate all around the U.S. And people did that last 2 years ago when we did it, and it was amazing. So they could go to renovated.live and check out all the information if they're interested. And it is for women only. It's a wife conference. You can host in your home a group of women in your home and go through it together. It's very powerful. It was a game changer for my marriage.
Well, I hope people will take advantage of that. If we can find information, I know it's several months away, but that way people can put it on the calendar and plan to participate in that, whether they're close enough to be there in person or if they choose to do it remotely. So, Jennelle, how can people learn more about your work, or if they want to have their marriage become more Christ-centered, what would you suggest them? What next steps would you suggest they take?
Yeah. So, the next steps would be basically any of those, the conference that's coming up, renovated.live, if they're a woman, that would be a great resource for them. And a lot of, my material kind of comes from that. I mean, it was just pivotal and changed my marriage. So it is also, a lot of that language is used in my coursework, and a lot of my resources do come from that marriage conference. So that's huge. Another thing is going to christcenteredcouple.com. There are free resources there. You can even do like a free call with me if you have just questions or want to do like a consult to see, kind of what would be the best next step for you. And then this summer, I will have some courses in case people just want to do something on their own and not have one-on-one coaching or, be part of a group. You can do the courses. And then for right now, something that they can join that's starting May 1st is going to be what I'm calling our Christ-centered couple Team Unity. So it's CCC Team Unity, and that's a monthly subscription that they can be a part of and join the community. It's much like a Facebook group, but it's hosted on its own platform, so as to not be distracting and kind of pull you off like Facebook would, it's just kind of, you're going to go on there and you're just doing some marriage work while you're in there. So it's a very focused, group, and that group is going to be amazing for accountability. We're going to have weekly challenges. The very first challenge that we're doing starting May 1st is going to be the Speak Life Challenge. And each week we're going to give you ideas and opportunities to speak life into your marriage over the next 3 weeks, the first 3 weeks of May. So that's something they can be a part of. Nathan and I are going to go live on that platform every Tuesday night. So that'll be a great time of fellowship for other couples, and also to encourage each other in the challenges. We'll also be giving away a date night every month if you're participating in the challenge and posting and commenting and being part of Team Unity. So, those are some ways they can kind of jump in right now. Also, the Well Training and Discipleship Ministry is a women's ministry. So sorry to the guys out there, but it is an incredible resource as well. You can go to thewelltraining.org and check out resources. They always have trainings and conferences. Almost all of their trainings and resources and classes are all free. The conferences are at a cost, but there are a lot of free resources that the Well does offer, and that also is just incredible for discipleship in general, not marriage specific, but again, marriage is part of your discipleship. So, it does tie in.
Yeah, well, that's a ton of starting points for people, and I hope folks will take advantage of it. As a guy, I love hearing that there are these types of resources for my wife and for ladies. Kind of like what you were saying, that one of the things that really turned things around for your husband was not you talking him into these things, but him being able to get exposure to other men who he could learn from. And in the same way as husbands, we should be encouraging our wives to be part of communities that can help them. Guys, it's going to come back to us. Like, there's going to be a benefit. So for sure, I hope that whether you are a wife or whether you're a husband listening to this and you think that this might be a good resource for your wife, that you'll check out the links and Jennelle's ministry, Christ-Centered Couple. We'll have those, and it's just getting started next month. So
yeah,
how cool to jump in on the front end. It's obviously going to be a very active group. Like, sometimes you join these groups, and at least I have, they're not necessarily all religious groups, but just like personal development groups. And you go in and it's crickets, like nothing's actually happening in those groups. But obviously you guys already have a plan that there's going to be regular interaction and opportunities to grow and to learn. So I hope folks will check it out and be a part of that. Jennelle, thanks so much for coming on today and sharing with us from what God has taught you and what he's doing in your life. Would love to have you on again in the future to see how things are going and what he's doing through Christ-Centered Couple.
Thank you so much, Andrew. It's just such such an exciting time to be on this, because I've admired this, ministry the work that you're doing with Into the Harvest, and I watch the podcast regularly. And I've been in this season of this, like I said, just really chasing hard after God and seeking him in prayer like I've never sought him before, and feel called to launch this. And it was like, no coincidences that you would reach out to me right such a time as this. So I just feel just honored to, be used by God, however he sees fit. I just want him to get all the glory and for everything to point to him.